I woke up on my 23rd birthday to my mother shaking my shoulder, and for a moment, I thought I was still dreaming. Still trapped in that nightmare where I was 36, broken, and dying in a county jail cell because I'd taken the fall for someone who'd stopped visiting me after the first month. But no. The calendar on my wall showed the date clearly. March 15th, 13 years ago, the day everything started. My hands were young again. No scars from where I'd tried to break the mirror in my cell, no tremor from the medication they'd given me after my third panic attack. Just smooth skin, short nails painted the pale pink my mother liked, and the cheap promise ring my college boyfriend had given me still circling my finger. I sat up slowly, my heart hammering. My mother was already talking, her voice pitched with that particular anxiety that meant family politics were involved. And you know how important this is for Melissa. The background check is incredibly thorough. For this position. Did you say clearance, they said. She's been dreaming of this job for years. Melissa. My cousin. The reason my first life had ended in ruins. Your Aunt Linda is beside herself, my mother continued, perching on the edge of my bed like she used to do when I was a child and she wanted something. Melissa's record has that incident from college. It was nothing. You know that. Just a misunderstanding with her roommate's laptop, but it shows up as theft on the police report. They dismissed it, but it's still there. She'll never pass the clearance. I knew this script. I'd lived it before. In my first life, I'd been so young, so eager to please, so desperate to be the good daughter, the helpful cousin. I'd said yes to everything that came next. Mom, I said slowly, testing my voice. It came out younger than I remembered, but steady. What are you asking me to do? She had the grace to look uncomfortable for about half a second. Your record is spotless. You just passed your own background check for the NSA internship. You and Melissa look similar enough, and you know how careless these government processors can be. If you went to the appointment instead of her, used your information for the fingerprints and the interview, but gave her name for the employment, that's identity fraud. The words came out flat. Federal identity fraud for a security clearance. That's a felony. Don't be dramatic. My mother stood up, smoothing her skirt with sharp movements. It's helping family. Melissa just needs this chance. Once she's in the job, she'll be perfect. She just needs to get past this one hurdle. You've always been the responsible one, the one who fixes things. Your aunt is counting on you. I'm counting on you. In my first life, I'd caved within the hour. I'd told myself it was just one small thing, that family helped family, that surely it wouldn't matter. I'd gone to that appointment. I'd given my fingerprints under Melissa's name, advice. I'd answered all the security questions with my clean history, while the forms all said Melissa Hartwell instead of Rachel Hartwell. And Melissa had gotten the job, a prestigious position at a defense contractor, handling classified materials, pulling in 6 figures while I started my own modest career as a junior analyst at the NSA. For 2 years, everything had been fine. Great, even. Melissa had been grateful. The family had praised me. I'd felt like I'd done a good thing. Then the audit happened. The routine security review that discovered Melissa Hartwell's fingerprints in the system didn't match the Melissa Hartwell employed at Stratton Defense Solutions. An investigation that uncovered I had posed as her during the clearance process. Federal agents at my door at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. My own security clearance immediately suspended. My NSA career terminated on the spot. Melissa had sworn she'd tell them the truth, that she'd explain I was only helping her, that she'd take responsibility. She'd cried and hugged me and promised she'd make this right. She'd gotten a lawyer who advised her to cooperate fully with investigators, which meant confirming that yes, Rachel Hartwell had committed fraud. Yes, Rachel had approached her with the scheme. Yes, Rachel had seemed troubled lately, had mentioned money problems, had been acting erratically. All lies. But Melissa kept her job and avoided criminal charges by playing the victim. Meanwhile, I'd been convicted of identity fraud, falsification of government documents, and conspiracy. 3 years in federal prison. My career destroyed. My life obliterated. I'd gotten out at 28, unable to find work better than retail because of my record, unable to rebuild. My boyfriend had left me during the trial. My friends from college and the NSA had evaporated. Even my mother had eventually stopped visiting, uncomfortable with having a felon daughter. Melissa, meanwhile, had thrived. Promoted twice. Married to a Department of Defense official she'd met through work. living in a beautiful house in Arlington, posting pictures on social media of her perfect life, while I'd been unable to afford therapy for my PTSD. I'd lasted until 36. Pills and despair in a jail cell after I'd been arrested for a parole violation I hadn't committed. Dying alone, bitter and broken, my last thought that I wished I could go back and choose differently. And now I had. Rachel? My mother's voice sharpened. Are you listening to me? Your aunt will be here in an hour. Melissa needs an answer. I looked at my mother, really looked at her. In my first life, I'd loved her desperately, had wanted her approval more than anything. Now I could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she valued her sister's approval over my well-being, the way she'd already decided my future didn't matter as much as Melissa's. No, I said. She blinked. What? No, I'm not going to commit a federal crime for Melissa. She can explain her record honestly, or find a job that doesn't require that level of clearance. My mother's face went through several expressions: shock, confusion, and then anger. Don't be selfish. This is family. Family doesn't ask you to risk federal prison. I stood up, surprised by how steady I felt. 13 years of memories, 13 years of consequences that she couldn't see yet. The answer is no. Please leave my room. You're being ridiculous. It's one small favor. Get out, Mom. She left, her heels clicking hard on the floor. I could hear her downstairs, already on the phone with Aunt Linda, her voice rising in complaint. I sat back down on my bed, my hands shaking now with adrenaline and something like exhilaration. I'd said no. I'd actually said no. My phone buzzed. A text from Melissa. Heard you were being difficult. Thought we were close. This is really important to me, Rach. In my first life, messages like this had worked. Guilt and obligation had been my weaknesses. Now they just made me angry. I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started documenting everything. The date, the time, my mother's request, Melissa's text. I'd learned in my first life that documentation was everything. This time, I'd be meticulous. The next few weeks were uncomfortable. Aunt Linda came over to talk sense into me. My mother gave me the cold shoulder. Melissa showed up at my apartment in tears, begging me to reconsider, swearing it would be fine, that nothing bad would happen. I can't get any other job that pays like this, she'd sobbed on my couch. Not with that police report. This is my only chance, Rachel. Please, I'll owe you forever. Find another way, I'd said, unmoved by tears I knew were calculated. In my first life, I'd fallen for this performance. Now I could see the manipulation underneath. She'd left furious, and the family had closed ranks. Suddenly, I wasn't invited to Sunday dinners. My mother's calls became terse and accusatory. My younger sister Claire, who'd always followed my mother's lead, sent me a long text about how I was tearing the family apart over nothing. I focused on my NSA internship, throwing myself into the work with the advantage of knowing exactly what would be valued, what projects would succeed, what initiatives to join. My supervisor noticed. I got assigned to better projects. My security clearance progressed without issue because I hadn't committed any crimes. And I watched Melissa spiral. She tried other jobs, but nothing paid what she wanted. She tried lying on applications, but background checks caught it. She grew increasingly desperate and bitter, posting vague complaints on social media about family betrayal and people who abandoned you when you needed them most. I might have felt guilty, except I knew what she was capable of, what she would have done to me without a second thought. 3 months after my birthday, Melissa made her mistake. She found someone else to help her. Brandon Chen, a coworker from her retail job who had a clean record and needed money. She offered him $5,000 to go to the background check appointment in his name, then she'd use his clearance to get hired. Except Brandon wasn't as naive as I'd been. He recorded their conversations, he took the money, went to the appointment legitimately for himself, and then reported Melissa for attempted clearance fraud. I found out through the family grapevine, Aunt Linda calling my mother in hysterics, Melissa potentially facing criminal charges. How could that terrible man betray her like this? I felt nothing but a cold satisfaction. She'd tried to do to Brandon exactly what she'd done to me. But this time, there was no ignorant cousin to take the fall. The investigation expanded. Federal agents looking into Melissa's background found the original police report from college. Not a misunderstanding, they discovered, but actual theft she'd plea bargained down. With a good lawyer. They found other applications where she'd lied about her record. Pattern of deception, the prosecutors called it. Melissa tried to drag me into it, told investigators I'd agreed to help her before backing out, that I was part of the conspiracy. But I had my documentation. My texts showing her pressuring me, my dated journal entries describing her requests, and my refusals. I also had something she didn't know about. I'd quietly reported the entire scheme to the NSA security office the week after my birthday. Told them family had approached me about clearance fraud, that I'd refused, and I wanted it on record in case there was retaliation. The security officer had been impressed with my integrity and made detailed notes. When Melissa tried to claim I'd been involved, the investigators found those notes, found my report, found my clean nose while Melissa's schemes unraveled. She took a plea deal in the end, probation, and a permanent mark on her record that would keep her from ever getting security clearance. Her dreams of a high-paying defense job evaporated. Brandon kept his $5,000 and got a commendation from the FBI for reporting fraud. My family was in shambles. Aunt Linda blamed everyone but Melissa. My mother was caught between defending her niece and facing the evidence of what Melissa had actually tried to do. Sunday dinners became tense, awkward affairs I mostly skipped. Claire called me one night, 8 months after my rebirth. "I read the police reports," she said quietly. "From Melissa's case. The investigator mentioned she'd tried to get you involved too." "She did. Mom said you refused to help with a background check thing. I thought you were being mean." Claire's voice was small. "I'm sorry. I didn't know Melissa was asking you to commit crimes." It was the first genuine apology I'd gotten from anyone in the family. "It's okay," I said, and meant it. Claire had been 18, easily influenced by our mother. "You didn't know. What she tried to do to that Brandon guy, she would have done that to you, wouldn't she? Let you take the fall?" I thought about my first life, my conviction, Melissa's testimony against me, my years in prison while she'd lived beautifully. "Yes," I said simply. "She would have." Claire was quiet for a long moment. "I'm glad you said no." "Me too." My NSA internship turned into a full-time position. I was 24, building the career I'd lost in my first life. Except this time, I was doing it with the wisdom of a woman who'd lived to 36 the hard way. I knew which projects would succeed, which initiatives to avoid, which managers to impress. I was careful never to seem too knowledgeable. I played the enthusiastic junior analyst who asked good questions and showed promise. But I rose fast. Commendations. High-profile assignments. Security clearance upgrades. By the time I was 26, I was a senior analyst making twice what Melissa had made at the job she'd tried to fraud her way into. I bought a condo in D.C. I dated carefully, avoiding the boyfriend who'd abandoned me in my first life. I went to therapy to process the trauma of memories from a life that hadn't happened yet. Melissa, meanwhile, was working at a call center. Her probation was over, but her record and the fraud attempt followed her. She'd tried to rebuild, but every background check sank her. She posted less on social media. The few times I saw her at family events, she wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother tried occasionally to get me to help Melissa. "She's learned her lesson," Mom would say. "Maybe you could talk to your contacts, put in a good word for her somewhere." "No," I'd say, every single time. No explanation, no justification, just no. I didn't tell my mother that I'd also quietly made sure certain people in security circles knew about Melissa's history. Not maliciously spreading rumors, just making sure that when her name came up for positions involving trust or sensitive information, the right people remembered to look closely at her background. Insurance, I told myself. Making sure she never got the chance to do to someone else what she'd done to me. 3 years after my rebirth, I was at an interagency security conference when I saw him. The prosecutor who'd handled Melissa's case, now working on a task force investigating clearance fraud across multiple agencies. We'd met briefly during Melissa's investigation when I'd been interviewed as a witness. He'd been impressed by my documentation and my decision to report the scheme early. Now, seeing me at the conference with a senior analyst badge, he smiled in recognition. "Ms. Hartwell, good to see you again. I heard you've been doing excellent work at NSA." Thank you. The case you built against my cousin was very thorough. We had good witnesses. He paused. Actually, I wanted to ask, we're expanding the task force, looking for analysts who understand both the technical side and the human element of security fraud. Someone mentioned your name. Would you be interested in discussing a transfer? It was perfect. Better than anything I'd imagined. A position investigating the exact kind of fraud that had destroyed my first life, with the chance to prevent it from happening to others. Very interested, I said. The transfer went through in 6 months. I joined a joint task force with FBI, DoD, and NSA personnel, hunting for patterns of clearance fraud across the government and defense contractors. It was intense, demanding work. It was also deeply satisfying. We caught schemes like the one Melissa had tried. People selling clean records, family members swapping identities, forged documents. Each case we broke was another person who wouldn't go through what I had in my first life. I was 29 when we investigated Stratton Defense Solutions, the same company where Melissa had gotten her job in my first timeline. This time, we were looking at a ring of employees who'd all fraudulently obtained their clearances through various schemes. I wasn't lead investigator, but I was on the team. I got to see the whole structure of corruption that had existed in my first life while I'd been rotting in prison. I helped build the cases that brought down 15 people and resulted in a complete overhaul of their security procedures. The irony wasn't lost on me. In my first life, I'd have been employee number 16 in that investigation. Now I was the one catching them. My mother eventually accepted that Melissa's failures were Melissa's fault. It took years and a lot of family therapy that Aunt Linda insisted on, but even Linda eventually acknowledged that Melissa had made her own choices. Bad ones. Melissa herself disappeared from my life. She moved to another state, found work that didn't require clearances, and stopped coming to family events. I heard through Claire that she'd married someone she met online and was trying to start fresh somewhere. No one knew her history. I felt no particular sympathy. She'd have done the same to me without hesitation. Claire, on the other hand, had become a real sister to me in this life. She'd gone to law school, specializing in federal criminal defense, and we had long conversations about the cases I could discuss and the legal theory behind security law. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me once, over dinner when I was 30. "Not helping Melissa, I mean. The family was rough on you for a while." I thought about my first life, the conviction, the prison time, the years of struggling to survive after release, dying alone and broken. "Not even for a second," I said. "Good." Claire raised her glass. "To having boundaries and letting people face consequences." I clinked my glass against hers. "To having boundaries." At 32, I was promoted to task force lead. My team had one of the highest clearance fraud conviction rates in the program. I'd published several papers on security vulnerabilities and detection methods. I was respected, successful, and most importantly, free. I was at a conference in Virginia when I saw Melissa for the first time in years. She was serving coffee in the hotel restaurant, wearing a name tag that said Mel. She looked older than 33, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the early shift. She saw me, too. Recognition and something like fear crossed her face. I could have ignored her, could have pretended I hadn't noticed, but I walked over to her station, professional smile in place. "Melissa, it's been a while." She swallowed hard. "Rachel, I heard you were doing well. Government work." "Yes, I lead a task force investigating security clearance fraud." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "It's very fulfilling. We prevent a lot of people from making bad decisions that would ruin their lives." She flinched. That's good. "How are you?" I kept my voice polite. Mildly interested, the tone you'd use with a distant acquaintance. "Fine. Managing. This job's okay. Decent tips." She was lying. I could see it in the tightness around her eyes, the way her hand shook slightly as she poured coffee. "I'm glad you found something that works for you." I paused, then added, "It's important to live within your means. Accept your limitations. Not everyone is cut out for high security work." Her jaw tightened. "Yeah, I learned that." "Good." I accepted the coffee cup she handed me. "It's important to learn from mistakes. Some people never do." I left a $20 tip and walked away. I didn't look back. That night, in my hotel room, I thought about the parallel lives Melissa and I had lived. In my first timeline, she'd thrived on my sacrifice. In this one, she'd paid for her own choices while I'd succeeded on my own merit. Both our clearances had been revoked in the first timeline, mine through conviction, hers through the investigation that had followed. We'd both been barred from the career she'd wanted so desperately. The difference was, in this timeline, only she'd been revoked. Only she'd faced the consequences. And I'd built something better than either of us had in the first life. I'd built it honestly. My phone buzzed with an email. A case briefing for next week. Another fraud ring, this one involving a major aerospace contractor. 16 suspects, potentially hundreds of compromised clearances. I opened my laptop and started reading. This was my purpose now. Not just the career I'd lost before, but something bigger. Making sure other naive, hopeful young people didn't get manipulated into throwing away their futures for family guilt and false loyalty. Making sure people like Melissa faced consequences instead of profiting from others' destruction. At 35, I was offered a director position, the youngest in the program's history. My team had expanded to 40 analysts and investigators across 5 agencies. We'd revamped security clearance protocols across the federal government. Our methods had been adopted internationally. I'd written 2 books on security fraud prevention. I'd testified before Congress 3 times. I'd been interviewed on 60 Minutes about the hidden epidemic of clearance fraud and its national security implications. I'd dated, though nothing serious stuck. I'd learned to be more cautious about trust in this life, and the therapy helped me understand why. I had good friends from work, a close relationship with Claire and her family, and a cordial distance from my mother, who'd never quite forgiven me for not sacrificing myself for Melissa. I had peace. The week before my 36th birthday, the age I'd died in my first life, I was going through old emails and found the last message Melissa had sent me in that first timeline. It had been from prison during my 3rd year. She'd sent it to my old email address that I'd kept accessing from the prison library. I'm sorry things worked out this way. I really am. But you have to understand, I had to protect myself. I hope you can forgive me someday. I've moved on and I think you should too. I'd read that email dozens of times in my first life, each reading peeling away another layer of the naive trust I'd once had. She was sorry things worked out, as if my conviction had been an accident of fate rather than her deliberate testimony against me. She'd had to protect herself, as if I'd been some threat rather than the person she'd manipulated into fraud. She'd moved on to her beautiful house and promotion and perfect life while I'd been in a cell. Now, in this timeline, I searched for her name in my personal email. Nothing. We hadn't corresponded in years. I checked social media out of curiosity. Her profiles were sparse. A few pictures of her husband, a generic house in a modest neighborhood somewhere in Ohio, no posts about work or achievements, no pictures of vacations or celebrations, just the quiet online presence of someone who'd learned to keep their head down. I closed the browser and deleted my search history. I didn't need to keep tabs on her. She was irrelevant to my life now except as a reminder of what I'd escaped. My 36th birthday was on a Saturday. Claire threw me a small party with my close friends and her family. My mother came, awkward but trying. She'd mellowed over the years, perhaps recognizing that I'd been right to refuse, though she'd never said it explicitly. At the end of the night, Claire pulled me aside. You know what I realized? You're the age now that you would have been when you got out of prison, if you'd done what Melissa wanted. I'd never told Claire about the rebirth, about living through it all before, but her words struck deep anyway. Yeah, I said quietly, I would have been. Instead, you're a director, you've changed federal policy, you've saved probably hundreds of people from making bad choices. She hugged me tight. I'm really proud of you. For saying no. For standing firm. For building all this. I hugged her back, tears stinging my eyes. Thank you. That night, alone in my condo, I thought about both lives. The Rachel who'd said yes and lost everything. The Rachel who'd said no and built everything. Both versions of me had lost our clearances in a way. The first through conviction and fraud, the second through sacrifice. But only one of us had gotten them back, had earned them, had used them to matter. I pulled up the classified briefing for Monday. A new case, a complex fraud network we'd been tracking for months. We were close to making arrests, close to saving more people from the kind of destruction I'd experienced. I was 36 years old. In my first life, I died this year. In this one, I was just beginning the best phase of my career. I thought about Melissa, working service jobs somewhere in Ohio, her dreams of prestige and six-figure salaries long, dead. I thought about the clearances we'd both lost, hers to her own fraud, mine to my refusal to commit it. And I smiled, because in the end, I'd won. Not by destroying her, she'd destroyed herself, but by refusing to be destroyed with her, by choosing truth over family loyalty, by choosing my future over her convenience. Both our clearances had been revoked in my first timeline. In this one, only she'd lost hers forever, and I'd gained everything she'd dreamed of, earned honestly, built with integrity. I went to bed that night peaceful, successful, and free, 36 years old and just getting started. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't destruction. It was refusing to be destroyed. At 40, I published my third book and accepted a position as Deputy Director of the Federal Security Clearance Bureau, a newly created agency born from my task force's work. We'd grown from a small investigative team to a full federal bureau overseeing all clearance processes across government and contractors. Claire was now a partner at a major law firm, specializing in defending people wrongly accused of clearance violations. We worked on opposite sides sometimes, but with mutual respect. She'd married and had 2 daughters who called me Aunt Rachel and wanted to be secret agents like me when they grew up. My mother had retired to Florida with her second husband. She and my father had divorced years ago. The strain of Melissa's case, one of many cracks in their marriage. We spoke monthly, a cordial relationship that would never be warm, but had achieved equilibrium. I'd heard through the family that Melissa had divorced and moved back to Illinois, working administrative jobs and keeping a low profile. Aunt Linda had stopped mentioning her years ago, the daughter she'd once been so proud of, now a source of quiet shame. I didn't think about Melissa much anymore. She'd become a footnote in my story rather than the villain, important for what she'd taught me, about boundaries and self-protection, but no longer relevant to my daily life. The Bureau kept me busy. We'd revolutionized clearance processes, implementing AI-assisted fraud detection, mandatory integrity training, and strict penalties for manipulation attempts. Fraud rates had dropped by 60% in 5 years. More importantly, we'd created support systems for people pressured by family or circumstances to commit fraud, confidential reporting, legal protection, resources to help them resist the pressure without destroying their families. Every person who called our hotline, every young professional who reported a family member's manipulation attempt, every case where someone chose integrity over obligation, they were all victories. All versions of my younger self making better choices. At 42, I met Marcus. He was a cybersecurity consultant working with the Bureau on a major infrastructure project. Divorced, 2 teenage kids, a steady calm that felt safe after years of dating men who were either intimidated by my position or too interested in it. We took it slow. Dinners and long conversations, meeting each other's families, building trust carefully, both of us survivors of previous relationship failures. He proposed on my 44th birthday, and I said yes with none of the terror I'd felt in my first life at the idea of marriage. This was different. He knew who I was. He'd never asked me to compromise myself for him. Claire was my maid of honor. My mother cried at the wedding. Happy tears this time. Melissa wasn't invited and didn't reach out, which was fine. She existed in a parallel universe I'd left behind. Marcus and I bought a house in Maryland with space for his kids' visits and a home office for my late-night case reviews. We adopted 2 cats. We built a life that felt stable and real in ways my first life had never achieved. I was 46 when I testified before Congress again, this time about expanding the Bureau's mandate to include private sector clearances. The hearing was broadcast on C-SPAN, my testimony detailed and confident. Afterward, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but area code I knew, Illinois, where Melissa had moved. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. Rachel? The voice was hesitant, older. Melissa. I saw you on TV, the congressional hearing. You were really impressive. I waited, saying nothing. I wanted to say, she paused. I wanted to say I'm sorry for what I asked you to do, for what I would have done if you'd said yes. I know it's late. I know you probably don't care, but I needed to say it. I thought about my first life, her testimony against me, the years in prison, dying alone in a cell. I thought about this life, everything I'd built, everything I'd become. Melissa, I said calmly, I appreciate the apology, but you should know I stopped needing it about 20 years ago. I know, seeing you up there, so successful, knowing what I almost destroyed. Her voice cracked. I'm glad you said no. I'm glad you stopped me. I stopped me, I corrected gently. You would have gone through with it. You tried with someone else, remember? I know. That's what I've had to live with. She was quiet for a moment. You saved both of us, you know. If you'd done it, we'd both be ruined now. You saw that somehow. Even at 23. I had seen it. I'd lived it. But I couldn't tell her that. I saw that you were asking me to commit a serious crime, I said instead. And I chose not to, that's all. It changed everything. Yes, it did. We were silent for a long moment. Then Melissa spoke again, softer. I hope you have a good life, Rachel. You deserve it. I do have a good life, I said. I built it carefully. Honestly, it's exactly what I wanted. Good. She sounded like she might cry. That's good. I'll let you go. Goodbye, Rachel. Goodbye, Fat Melissa. I hung up and looked at Marcus, who'd been pretending not to listen from the kitchen. The cousin? He asked. The cousin. You okay? I thought about it. 23 years since my rebirth. 23 years of building a life worth living. 23 years of knowing I'd made the right choice. Yeah, I said. I'm perfect. That night, I pulled out my old journals from the early days of my rebirth. The frantic documentation of my mother's request, Melissa's pressure, my refusals. I'd kept them all these years as insurance, as evidence, as proof of what had happened. I didn't need them anymore. I fed the pages into the shredder one by one, watching decades of fear and justified paranoia turn into strips of paper. The evidence of a battle I'd already won, a sacrifice I'd never had to make. When I was done, Marcus wrapped his arms around me from behind. Letting go? Already let go? I said. This is just cleanup. We went to bed early, the kind of peaceful tired that comes from a day well lived. I dreamed of nothing in particular. No prison cells, no betrayals, no deaths alone in the dark. Just quiet. Just peace. At 50, the Bureau threw me a retirement party. I'd served as deputy director for 10 years, director for 3. We'd transformed security clearance processes nationwide. Fraud was down 80% from my first year. We'd saved countless careers and prevented incalculable damage to national security. My successor was a woman I'd mentored for 5 years, sharp, principled, and dedicated to the mission. The Bureau was in good hands. I spent my retirement consulting, writing, and teaching. Guest lectures at Georgetown and Harvard on security ethics, advisory positions with think tanks, the occasional high-profile case that needed my expertise. Marcus and I traveled, places I'd never seen in my first life, because I'd been too broken or too poor. Paris, Tokyo, New Zealand. We visited Claire and her family in Boston. We babysat his grandchildren and spoiled them thoroughly. I was 54 when Aunt Linda died. The funeral was small, and Melissa was there, 52 now, gray in her hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of a hard life lived quietly. We nodded to each other across the room. Nothing more needed to be said. My mother was 78, her memory fading, but her presence still familiar. She held my hand during the service and whispered, "You were always the strong one." I should have seen it sooner. Better late than never, I supposed. At 58, I was invited to speak at the NSA's 50th anniversary of their clearance program, the internship that had started my career in both timelines. I stood at the podium and looked at the young faces in the audience, all of them just beginning their journeys. Integrity isn't always easy, I told them. Sometimes the people you love most will ask you to compromise it. They'll make it sound reasonable. They'll make you feel selfish for refusing. They'll pressure you with guilt and obligation and family loyalty. I paused, thinking of my 23-year-old self waking up on her birthday to an impossible choice. But your integrity is your foundation. Everything you build has to stand on it. If you compromise it for someone else, even someone you love, you're not helping them. You're just ensuring you both sink together. The audience was silent, listening. Both your clearances will get revoked, I said softly. Both your careers will end. Both your lives will be damaged, maybe irreparably. And the person who asked you to sacrifice yourself, they'll move on. They'll rebuild. They'll leave you behind. I smiled, thinking of everything I'd built instead. Choose yourself. Choose integrity. Choose the hard right over the easy wrong, because the foundation you build honestly will support you for life. The applause was long and warm. Afterward, a young woman approached me, 23, bright-eyed, nervous. Ms. Hartwell, I just wanted to say thank you. My sister asked me to help her with something that would have violated my clearance. I was going to do it because she's family, but your talk, I'm going to tell her no. I felt something break loose in my chest, something I hadn't realized I was still carrying. This girl, this stranger who would never know about my first life, was making a better choice because I'd made mine, because I'd lived and learned and shared. Good, I told her, gripping her hand. That's the right choice. It'll be hard, but it's right. Remember that when the pressure comes. I will. Thank you. I watched her walk away, shoulders straight, decision made. One more person who wouldn't have to die in a cell at 36, broken and alone. One more person who wouldn't have to be reborn to get a second chance. That was enough. That was everything. At 60, I attended my final official event as a bureau consultant. My replacement's replacement was being sworn in. The third generation of leadership I'd helped shape. The bureau was thriving, evolving, doing work I could never have imagined in my first life. Claire was there with her family, her daughters now in college, one studying criminal justice, one studying law. Marcus was beside me, his hair white now but his hand warm in mine. My mother had passed 2 years before, her last words to me an apology she'd carried for decades. I should have protected you better. I'd forgiven her. Holding on to anger would have been like drinking poison and expecting someone else to die. The ceremony was beautiful. The speeches were eloquent. But my mind drifted to that morning 37 years ago, waking up in a young body with an old soul's memories. The impossible gift of time rewound, choices unmade, futures unwritten. I'd used that gift to save myself. And in saving myself, I'd saved so many others. Both our clearances got revoked, the title had promised. In my first life, that had been our shared destruction. In this one, it had been my salvation, refusing to join her in fraud, building my career honestly while she'd fallen on her own choices. The irony was perfect. The justice was complete. After the ceremony, I stood outside in the Washington sunshine, 60 years old and content. Marcus went to get the car. I had a moment alone with my thoughts. A young man approached, an analyst from the bureau, maybe 25. Director Hartwell, I wanted to thank you. I read your first book in college. It's why I chose this field. What was your favorite part? I asked, genuinely curious. The chapter about boundaries and family. About how the people closest to us can sometimes ask us to sacrifice our values, and how saying no to them is saying yes to ourselves. He smiled. My mom wanted me to help my brother hide some stuff on a job application. I said no because of your book. He was mad for a while, but he eventually got his life together, honestly. We're good now. Another person saved from a version of my first life. I'm glad, I said, my voice thick. I'm so glad. He shook my hand and left. Marcus pulled up with the car. I got in and we drove home through the city I'd helped protect, past the buildings where I'd worked, the monuments to integrity and service that had defined my second life. Good day? Marcus asked. The best, I said. Because it was true. Because I'd won not through revenge or destruction, but through the simple, radical act of refusing to be destroyed. Of choosing my easy, of building something real and lasting on a foundation of honesty. Both our clearances had been revoked in my first timeline, mine through fraud, hers through investigation. In this timeline, only hers was gone forever. Mine had become the key to everything I'd built, and that was the victory I'd been reborn to achieve. Not revenge, not destruction, just the quiet, profound triumph of a life well lived. Honestly, completely. Mine and we drove home in comfortable silence, and I smiled at the city passing by. Somewhere out there, Melissa was living her small life, carrying the weight of choices she'd tried to make me share. And I was here, free, successful, whole. Both our clearances got revoked, but only I had earned mine back, and that made all the difference.